Quite a few people have asked if Good Nintentions will continue to look at the NES beyond the bounds of 1985, to which the answer is absolutely yes. So let's preface the eventual launch of Good Nintentions 1986 with a look at one of my favorite releases from 1986, but one which won't show up in Good Intentions proper, Konami's The Goonies, a game exclusive to the Japanese Famicom. Well, strictly speaking, The Goonies wasn't entirely exclusive to Famicom. It also saw limited release in the US via the PlayChoice 10 arcade system. But it never saw a retail release here, meaning that in order to enjoy it, you needed to import it or buy the PlayChoice 10 ROM. The Goonies exhibits better design tendencies than you might expect from a game of its vintage. Blame Konami, I suppose. They always made such nice games in the 8-bit days. The Goonies hails from right around the same time as Castlevania's original release, and while it certainly doesn't hold a candle to that classic, neither is it too shabby. And it forms an essential pairing with The Goonies II, which doesn't so much build on its foundation as simply turn the Goonies into the fleshed out adventure you suspect its designers really wanted it to be in the first place. What we have here is basically your classic 2D 8-bit microcomputer platformer, not unlike the MSX conversion of Castlevania and countless other PC action games of the day. It mixes twitch reflex with the need to be more observant and take in your surroundings. You run, jump, and attack as in an arcade game. You can collect temporary power-ups too. But there's a greater element of permanence in the Goonies, with certain power-ups becoming a fixed element of protagonist Mikey's repertoire, should you be able to find them. Like a lot of games of its era, a big part of the experience involves poking around in random areas to uncover hidden items. There's as much of Milon's Secret Castle or even Tower of Druaga about this game as there is Super Mario Bros. Young Mikey Walsh fights through 6 stages of increasing peril beneath an abandoned Italian restaurant, hunting for his friends the Goonies while acquiring treasures and battling both monsters and gangsters. Your goal in most stages is simply to open the door to the next level. In order to do that, you need to collect keys from the safes, and in order to make that happen, you have to kick mice who drop bombs upon their demise. Once you grab a bomb, and you can only carry one at a time, you drop it in front of a safe and wait for it to explode, at which point it will reveal the contents. Frequently, that will be either a key to the next door or one of Mikey's fellow Goonies. While the Goonies advances level by level, the spaces within a given level allow for some degree of free exploration. In fact, the later stages consist of multiple areas with interlocking paths linking them, turning effectively into mazes. They're worth exploring though, because in addition to keys and Goonies, you can also find permanent additions to Mikey's inventory. These power-ups confer huge advantages to him, everything from granting invulnerability to certain hazards to enabling a massive shortcut through the game. Again, it's very similar to Tower of Druaga, and as in that game, if you miss an item, you miss it forever. These bonus goods are much less essential than those in Tower of Druaga though, so skipping over them won't totally spoil your chances of survival. For example, the first item you'll likely collect is the headphones, which protect you from one of the Fratelli brothers' musical attacks. Remember how one of the brothers in the film liked to sing opera? Well, they've weaponized that. The headphones protect you. The second item available to you is the flame suit, which protects you from the jets of flame that appear in Stage 2. Again, you can finish the game without it, but having this added layer of protection makes the game much easier in the early going, as you no longer need to worry about waiting for jets to fire, making the stage timer much less daunting. Thematically, The Goonies does a surprisingly good job of recreating the themes and goals of the film, although obviously it takes its share of 8-bit liberties. Bad enough you're karate-kicking giant mice, but when you kick the orange ones, they reveal themselves to be foxes, because kitsune run rampant through the streets of Astoria, Oregon. And the Fratelli brothers chase Mikey throughout the game. Unlike the other enemies you have to deal with, the brothers can't be defeated, only stunned. With only 6 stages at hand, the game's difficulty unfolds fairly rapidly. The game loosely resembles the narrative flow of the film. You start out in the Fratelli hideout before venturing into the foundations of the building, into the caverns below Astoria, and eventually to One-Eyed Willie's ship. It definitely takes some liberties, like the presence of flame jets blasting from the ceiling of the restaurant basement at odd intervals. And it skips over the weirder movie set pieces like the giant pipe organ puzzle in favor of standard platforming. As an arcade-style action game, The Goonies definitely favors replay and discovery. A player probably won't find all the hidden treasures their first time through, or even figure out how precisely to reveal each stage's secrets. This fits neatly within the trends of the era, as many games emphasize the discovery of infuriatingly well-hidden objects in order to facilitate progression. Compared to something like, again, Milon's Secret Castle, The Goonies plays well, despite the opacity of its secrets. tools become something of a difficulty select. If you have them, it's a fairly straightforward platformer with a moderate emphasis on exploration. Without them, it becomes a very challenging action game that requires sharp reflexes and steely nerves. Tellingly, the second loop of the game, once you complete the 6th stage, goes about implementing the obligatory added difficulty by making items ludicrously difficult to acquire. In the first loop, you find items by performing specific actions depending on the stage, kicking or pressing up. But here, you have to drop bombs where they appear. Because of the slim time limit, you really have to strategize and know which items are most essential, know where they're located, and either choose to collect them or bypass them altogether. Once you learn the location of the hidden objects, the game does become a lot easier, and there's even a crazy warp trick that allows you to skip past an entire level. That means skipping the Goonie held captive in that stage. But if you do take the warp, the game compensates by causing that friend to show up in a different level instead. In order to warp, you have to collect the spring shoes item in stage 3. Mikey gains the ability to perform high jumps on one screen, and one screen only. This ability is not communicated in any way. There's no music, no visual effect, audio cue, or other indication that you'll suddenly jump 3 times as high as usual once you climb down to the screen. You really have to dig deep to discover this particular shortcut. That being said, it's a pretty cannily placed shortcut. Completing stage 3 allows you to collect all the items that counter environmental hazards, falling rocks, water, fire, and at the same time, you'll bypass an entire level that places a heavy emphasis on high damage dangers that can't be countered, as well as on extensive platforming. But then, in 1986, most kids didn't buy tons of games like people do today with Steam sales. Since games cost so much more, and so many fewer existed, kids picked up a game every once in a while and played them over and over again. The Goonies' frequently counterintuitive design, as in so many games of the era, reflected the habits and needs of its audience. You weren't meant to suss all the secrets in your first go-round, because then what would there be to do the next 50 times you played? The idea was to keep playing and keep finding new secrets. While I'm not saying this approach to design is above reproach, it does at least have purpose. For those only familiar with the Goonies II, they'll find much here that's familiar, not only in terms of controls and foes, but also in structure. While the sequel was entirely non-linear, its map's division into front and back zones draws on a design feature introduced in this game, though of course, the original Goonies skips the adventure scenes linking those zones. All told, the Goonies is a pretty decent little platformer for its era, more typical of 8-bit PC action games than the more linear and limited design that you saw in NES games at the time. But it's decidedly a game that looks and feels like an NES game. You can see the designers striving towards something deep and excellent here. It didn't quite work out, but they tried. Fortunately, many of the underlying ambitions here found purchase in the sequel, which came to retail in the US and represented one of the first proper Metroidvania adventures for the system. But even if it's simpler than its follow-up, it's still a fun little action game, one of the more solidly made of its particular NES Famicom vintage, and I could see myself having been quite a fan had it made its way to the US on the NES itself back in the day. C'est la vie. But you know, it's never too late to learn to love the Goonies. After all, Goonies never say die.